Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Heather Hatch again, and I'm here today with your MOA Talks. Today we're teaming up with Fanshawe Pioneer Village to talk about Wilfrid Jury, who was instrumental in founding both of our institutions. So I would like to talk about some of the contributions that Wilf and his wife Elsie made to the development and practice of archaeology in Ontario. So first, I'd like to say that when we were first strategizing these live sessions, we weren't really planning on the extent to which we would be shut down and staying home. So I don't really have the full amount of resources that if I were talking about this from the museum. So I can't bring out, for example, any artifacts to show off or that sort of thing, any documents and so on. So you'll just have to bear with me just talking. The other thing is that despite the current shutdown, the museum is looking forward to the future and how we can do a better job of presenting Ontario archaeology in our own future as an institution. So we're currently going through a planning exercise that's going to be helping us out to figure what direction is best to take for us in terms of how we're talking about Ontario archaeology in our gallery spaces and in our programming as well. So to that end, we're looking for some feedback from the public, which is really anyone who's watching this stream or this video later. So I'm going to drop a link in the feed comments, and if you would like to take a few minutes to fill out the attached survey, we would really appreciate your input. So just give me a second to get all this stuff set up, and I'll comment in. Also, from home. So if anyone has any comments there or questions, as soon as I can get that actually, as soon as Facebook decides to cooperate with me, then we can take those questions. Of course, it's not going to cooperate with me right now, but I'll get to those in just a minute. So what I really wanted to talk about today was Wilf's commitment to what we would consider at this point in time either public history or public archaeology. So from the very beginning of his career, or from his interest in archaeology really, he wanted to share his knowledge and his discoveries. So I'm not going to get into his full background. There's lots of that available. We have some histories of Wilf on the site, for example, on our website. I believe Fanshawe Pioneer Village also has some information about his background. Excuse me. But just to give you some context of the time frame that we're talking about, he was born in 1890, and he sort of really got into his collecting in his 20s and 30s. So, and then moving on from there. Okay, so here we go. Just a minute. I'm going to drop that link in here. If I can actually get it to open with me. Of course, everyone's on the internet these days, so everything's very slow. So he was born in 1890, and he started as somebody who was just really interested in both the peoples and objects of the past, and also of contemporary First Nations, so First Nations people who were living at the same time as him. So from his early roots as sort of just an interested collector, he wanted, as I said, he was really interested in sharing everything that he knew and everything that he'd collected. Come on. Ugh, everything's just giving me technical difficulties. So as he became more involved with academic archaeology and started pursuing his own projects, he was able to have a place at Western University, originally in the Lawson Library there, and then eventually he was given a position as a curator there of the museum at Western to show his objects. But he always recognized the importance of inviting both the media and the public to come out to his excavations as they were in progress, and of trying to provide relatable stories to people. So he made a lot of contacts with different journalists and was able to have major stories about his excavation works in several papers, both in London and Toronto, and as well as in other communities where he was working. So he wanted to, like I said, to promote what he was doing, to give people an opportunity to come out and see what he was working with, to see what was happening in the field, and to ask questions and to be sort of involved at that level, at that early stage of the archaeology. So this was actually a pretty novel approach at the time. So most archaeologists weren't really interested in involving the public at that stage of the work. So usually people would have to wait until the artifacts made their way into an exhibit, if that ever happened, or they'd have to read about it in a paper or a report that would be published by a museum or maybe a local historical society, or maybe they'd be lucky enough to be able to come out to some sort of archaeological talk about the work after it happened. So it's not really exactly what we would call accessible in the same way as having a write-up of this kind of information in a newspaper or being able to go out to an excavation site in person and see it would be. So we actually have scrapbooks from Jury's project starting in about the 1930s that record, all the press releases and articles surrounding his work. There we go. So now I've got everything up. I'm going to drop that link in the comments just before I continue. If it will let me. Everything's being very, very slow today. Anyway, so it wasn't really accessible to the public before he was like, or other kinds of work that was being done in Ontario. It wasn't necessarily as accessible as the kinds of excavations that Jury was running. Again, you can hear my coworker barking in the background. So we have these scrapbooks starting in the 1930s. He was also really an early adopter of photographic and video technology in the field. So we also have photo albums of his work that dates back to this era as well, to the 1930s, and then moving forward as well. So he really was quite interested in, again, the recording aspects of archaeology. I talked about how important that was. So that documentary, and also the sharing. So that was really quite, like I said, pretty unique, and he was really an early proponent of that engagement with the public, where even a lot of archaeologists today have difficulty making their work accessible to the public as it's happening. So this is something that obviously as an educational institution to us, is very important to us. This sort of, that level of engagement, that recognition of public interest, and that, sort of attempting to make those connections with the public. So his investment in promoting the past to the public didn't really stop at excavation. So he wanted to bring these sites to life by rebuilding them so that people could come out and experience them firsthand. So both the Lawson site, obviously, and which is the archaeological site that we talked about in one of our earlier videos. It's located adjacent to the museum. And I believe Katie's actually going to give you a little bit more of a history on that site as well, tomorrow, I believe. But also Fanshawe Pioneer Village are certainly, so these two sites, which are both in London, are really exemplify this instinct of his to sort of make things not just accessible, but experiential. So to give people something that they could come out and again, make a connection with in and of themselves. So while we have these great examples here in London, they're actually not necessarily the first examples of this kind of museum or attraction experience that Wilf was interested in promoting to people. So we've got his and Elsie's, I should say, archaeological work at St. Marie among the Hurons resulted in the reconstruction of the mission village there. So he's very interested in these early Jesuit missions, which I'll talk about here again in a little bit more detail in a minute. And they were also really instrumental in the building of Discovery Harbor up at Penetanguishene after his excavations of the naval base there. So there's a couple of these different sites around Ontario where Jury was really involved in work, and he really wanted to, again, make there be some sort of experience for people to come. So he was really the person who when the museum was of Ontario Archaeology was built where it is now in the 1980s, he really wanted there to be this recreation village there. And so that was why it was built as it is, or as it was at the time, and why we have, he's really still the reason we have a longhouse on site. Although, again, if I can actually get this survey link to post for me, that is something that we're looking at moving away from. And that's, again, as much as we want to find good ways to promote these kinds of experiential learning that Jury was really invested in, we think there's better methods of doing that today with new methods of technology. For example, we have the virtual reality longhouse experience in the gallery now, and we think that that is the sort of thing that if the technology had been available in his time, Wilf certainly would have been all over the opportunities and the potential of that kind of engagement as well, to not just be in a place, but to experience, to be able to engage with it directly. So that's sort of where we're hoping to be able to take the experiences that we're offering at the museum. And again, if I can get the link to post, there's a survey that we're hoping that people will be willing to fill out for us to give us some direction on where the public thinks we might be able to take our engagement. So talking more about Wilf and Elsie, the other thing that was notable about Wilf as an archaeologist is that unlike of his time, he was interested in sites for which there were corresponding historical records. Excuse me. So in this, he was exceedingly lucky, as he was married to an excellent research librarian and historian, so Elsie Jury, and they were really a good partnership. So I think we've maybe in the past couple of years, there's been some talk about looking at like older academics and how, you would say, you can really clearly see how the husband's work has been promoted and so forth, and you might get like a side note of like, thanks to my wife for taking all my notes and typing this all up for me. But Wilf and Elsie were really not like that. So she was very directly involved. She has her name on on many of the publications, and she even has publications in her own name. So Wilf was always pushing for her to get recognition by the university for her work, and even paid for the work that she was doing. So in that sense, they were really a partnership, and I think he really understood the extent to which her research supported his interests. So one of the neat things that we have at the museum, in the jury, there we go, somebody's posted the survey link for me, excellent, thank you very much. So one of the neat things we have in the museum, in the jury archives, are reams and reams of index cue cards representing the research that Elsie conducted back in the days before the internet, or even before computers were common research tools. So she would copy out references about specific topics from different books, and then file them based on their subjects, and then she could go back to those for reference when she was trying to look up details. And those cards would have specific like page number references about where she could find specific subjects in different books to help her pull together the kinds of information that they needed to help support the research into the sites that Wilf was excavating. And so Elsie also, we have a lot of photographs of Elsie out on sites with Wilf as well. So she wasn't just relegated to the library, she was involved in the archaeological research as well. So they really were a strong partnership. And I think that's kind of a great story to see if we're looking back into this period of like the 30s, 40s, 50s in academia. So she actually was, when I say that she was a research librarian, she actually did have a degree as well. So she was a very educated woman, as opposed to Wilf, who didn't, I don't believe, and I could be wrong, so please do correct me if I am, but I don't believe he actually formally finished high school. He joined the Navy when he was pretty young. So, as I was saying, she had all these references, she did all this really excellent research into these historical records, and then, so Wilf was interested in finding the early Jesuit mission sites. So Jesuits were a Catholic missionary order, an order of Catholic priests who sent a lot of missionaries to the New World to try and convert First Nations and Indigenous peoples who were living here. And he was really interested in finding some of those early mission sites in the Huron-Wendat homeland up around Georgian Bay. And so her research, Elsie's meticulous research, helped give him the clues that he needed to try and identify the potential locations of these sites, so that then they could go out and research and like look on the ground. So I talked about this a little bit in my last talk about Intro to Archaeology. So you can do the background research, excuse me, but then you still have to go out and actually look and see and verify archaeologically if your suppositions are correct. So they would work together in this way. So they were an excellent team, but at the time that they were working, many archaeologists in Ontario didn't really value the insights that you could get from historical research in this way. So not only did they not necessarily value the research itself, but they didn't necessarily see the point in examining any of these sites that were already described in historical documents from an archaeological perspective. So a lot of people at the time viewed sort of the written accounts as sufficient to understand what was happening. So they were really content to take the words of the Jesuits who were writing everything down about their own experiences, and didn't really leave necessarily a lot of direct voices for the peoples that they were missionizing to. So the archaeological approach that Elsie and Wilf were taking gave a different kind of perspective into that research, and added a deeper dimension to what we were able to say about these mission sites, more than just where they were, or what the Jesuits said was happening there. So it gave us a little bit more detail about the kinds of things people were using, how they were integrating new kinds of material culture that they were trading for into existing social systems, for example. All kinds of new interesting research questions about the daily lives of these people that we can look at archaeologically, rather than just reading about in the records. So yes, I have a comment here from Sean T saying some still don't. That's true. Some it's true. I would definitely say that there is definitely some archaeologists out there who don't necessarily value the insights that we can get from historical research, which I find is a shame, because I do think that the two disciplines complement each other very, very nicely. There's questions that you can answer from as many different approaches as you can take is going to give you a better answer, I find. So anyway, those are really the two main points that when we're talking today about Wilf and Elsie as a team, that I really wanted to highlight about how their work was important. So this idea of being able to promote materials to the public and creating that sense of public engagement, that public investment in archaeology, so helping people care about the past by getting these big newspaper articles out, as well as producing published academic reports, was really important to us. And then also, again, his work sort of establishing in Ontario this sort of historical archaeological approach was also really important to sort of the practice of archaeology and how people thought about what we value in archaeology moving forward from his time. So thank you very much for joining us again. I hope that's been a little bit of an interesting insight into the juries today. And I believe at least Fanshawe Pioneer Village is going to be continuing to post some interesting little facts about Wilfrid Jury throughout the day today on their Facebook feed. So if you want to know a little bit more about him, I encourage you to check that out. So thanks again, and we'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock.